Flying has never made me nervous. I actually enjoy it. Something about being suspended in the air, detached from everything, is comforting. I was on a red-eye flight from Europe back to the US, 8 hours in the air. I had a window seat, which I preferred, so I could lean against it and sleep. Next to me was a middle-aged woman reading a thick novel, and in the aisle seat, a man who immediately unsettled me. He was tall, too thin, with pale, almost grayish skin. His cheekbones were sharp, his eyes sunken. He was wearing a loose hoodie, his hands folded neatly in his lap. Something about him felt wrong. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Maybe he was just exhausted. Maybe he was sick. But he never moved. Not once. 2 hours passed. Then 3. The woman beside me got up to use the restroom, stepping over the aisle man carefully. He didn't even blink. Just stared straight ahead. That was when I noticed his lips. They were moving. Not like someone mumbling to themselves. It was faster, rhythmic, like whispering at an unnatural speed. No sound came out. Just the rapid, frantic movement of his lips. A shiver ran down my spine. I turned my head toward the window, pretending I hadn't noticed. The woman came back, sat down, and continued reading. She hadn't seen. I forced myself to relax, turning on a movie to distract myself. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I drifted into a light sleep. I don't know how long I was out before I woke up. Not from turbulence, not from an announcement, but from a feeling. A warm breath on my face. My eyes shot open. The aisle man was inches from me. He had unbuckled his seatbelt, turned toward me completely, and was leaning in so close that I could see the cracks in his dry lips. And they were still moving. Faster now. Like he was chanting. I recoiled, pressing myself against the window. What the hell? I stammered. The woman beside me looked up, confused. What's wrong? I motioned toward the aisle man, my breath coming fast. But when I turned, he was sitting normally again, facing forward, hands folded in his lap, seatbelt fastened, expression blank, like he had never moved. I felt like I was going crazy. I opened my mouth to say something to the woman, but the look on her face stopped me. She was staring at me, not confused, terrified. Slowly, she leaned in and whispered, "You did the same thing to me when you were asleep." A deep chill ran through my bones. I pressed the flight attendant button, but before anyone came, the aisle man turned his head, mechanically, too smoothly, and stared directly at me. His lips stopped moving. And then, for the first time, he spoke. A single sentence, perfectly clear, in a voice that was too deep for his body. "You were never supposed to wake up." I don't remember screaming, but I must have. Because the next thing I knew, a flight attendant was shaking my shoulder, asking if I was okay. The woman beside me was gone. So was the aisle man. I looked around wildly. Where did they go? The flight attendant frowned. "Sir, you've been asleep this whole flight. You've been alone this whole time." My heart stopped. I turned to the empty seat beside me. The book the woman had been reading was gone. I turned to the aisle seat. Nothing. But when I looked down, there was a single boarding pass resting on the seat. My hand shook as I picked it up. It was old, the paper yellowed, the ink faded. And the date printed on it? 3 years ago. The name on it? Mine. Story 2. I travel alone often. Not by choice, but because my friends can't always drop everything for a trip. I don't mind. It gives me the freedom to go wherever I want, whenever I want. A few months ago, I took a trip to a city I had never been to before. It wasn't a big tourist destination, but I had heard good things about its historic charm and quiet streets. I booked a boutique hotel in the center of town, a place that looked small and cozy. When I arrived, the lobby was nearly empty. A young woman at the front desk checked me in and handed me an actual key, not a key card. That felt old-fashioned, but the place had a certain charm. As I turned to head upstairs, a man near the elevator smiled at me. "First time here?" he asked. He was in his late 40s, dressed casually, with graying hair and an easy smile. "Yeah," I replied. "Great little city," he said. "I've been here a few times. Best food is down by the river. You staying long?" "Just a few days," I said. He nodded. "Well, if you need a guide, let me know." I smiled politely. Then he glanced at my suitcase. "Need a hand?" It was small, easy to carry, but I hesitated, not wanting to be rude. Sure. Thanks." We got in the elevator, and I told him my floor. "Oh, me too," he said. That gave me a weird feeling, but I kept it to myself. He carried my suitcase to my room, set it down outside the door, and smiled. "Enjoy your stay." I thanked him, went inside, and locked the door behind me. That night, after wandering the city, I returned to my room feeling good. I showered, changed, and settled into bed. Then, around 11 p.m., someone knocked. Housekeeping. I sat up. Housekeeping? This late? I walked quietly to the door and looked through the peephole. Nobody was there. The knock came again. Then, silence. A cold feeling crept over me. I didn't open the door. I waited. Listened. Nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself it had been a mistake. Someone at the wrong room. The next morning, I went to the front desk and casually asked if they had sent housekeeping to my room the night before. The woman at the desk frowned. Housekeeping doesn't come at night. I felt my stomach drop. Then she hesitated. What room are you in? I told her. She sighed. Listen, just be careful. If you see anyone acting strange, let us know. I wanted to ask more, but something about her tone made me afraid to hear the answer. That night, I double-checked my lock before bed. I even wedged a chair against the door, just in case. I must have dozed off at some point because I woke up suddenly to a strange noise. A soft click, like a door unlocking. My door. The handle turned. The chair blocked it from fully opening, but I could hear it pressing against the wood. Someone was pushing. Testing. I froze in bed, heart hammering. Then, a soft exhale. Right outside the door. I scrambled for my phone, dialing the front desk with shaking fingers. The second I hit call, the pressure on the door stopped. Silence. Then, rapid footsteps down the hall. The woman at the desk answered groggily. Hello. I whispered. Someone just tried to get into my room. She was silent for a second, then said, I'm sending security up right now. Don't open the door. I sat there, gripping the phone, waiting. Minutes later, a loud bang on my door made me jump. A deep voice said, Hotel security. I moved the chair aside, cracked the door open, and saw a uniformed guard standing there. He checked the hallway, empty. We'll review the cameras, he said. Stay in your room. Keep your door locked. The next morning, the hotel moved me to another room, but I barely slept the rest of my trip. Before I left, the front desk woman told me the cameras had caught someone in the hall outside my room. A man. They couldn't see his face clearly, but he had been standing outside my door for almost an hour before he tried the handle. Just standing there, watching. I never got confirmation, but I knew. It was him. The man from the elevator. The one who knew what floor I was on. The one who had asked how long I was staying. Story 3. I had been planning the solo trip for months. A 2-week trek through Southeast Asia, bouncing between hidden beaches, jungle trails, and ancient temples. It was supposed to be the kind of experience that changed your life, something I could look back on when I was older and feel proud that I did. By the second week, I found myself in a remote village at the edge of the jungle. It wasn't a major tourist spot, just a quiet, beautiful place where locals lived simply, and the trees stretched endlessly into the horizon. I had booked a small guest house, run by an elderly couple who barely spoke English but smiled warmly whenever they saw me. The real draw of this place was something I had only heard about through word of mouth from other travelers, a hidden temple deep in the jungle. It wasn't in any guidebooks, and the locals didn't advertise it. The only way to find it was to follow an unmarked trail about 2 miles into the forest, past an old abandoned village. Something about that last detail unsettled me. Why is the village abandoned? I had asked a younger man at the guest house, who spoke some English. He hesitated. People leave. Not safe. I laughed, thinking he meant wild animals or flooding. Not safe how? He just shook his head. I should have taken that as a warning. Instead, the next morning, I set out alone. The first part of the trek was easy, lush, green, with the sounds of birds and insects filling the air. I followed a narrow dirt path, careful not to stray too far from it. The heat was suffocating, but I was excited. Then, about a mile in, I found the abandoned village. It wasn't much. Just a few wooden houses, half collapsed, overtaken by vines and rot. There were no signs of life, no animals, no birds. Just silence. I tried not to let it get to me, but something about the place felt wrong, like I was being watched. I told myself it was paranoia and moved quickly past the ruins. The jungle got denser. The trees towered above me, blocking out most of the sunlight. The path was barely visible, winding between gnarled roots and thick underbrush. And that's when I saw them. Footprints. Fresh ones. Leading ahead of me. At first, I was relieved. It meant someone else had been here recently, right? But the more I looked at them, the stranger they seemed. The prints were deep, like whoever left them had been dragging their feet. And they were barefoot. Something about that made my stomach twist. I wasn't alone. I kept walking, but I was moving slower now, more aware of my surroundings. Then, after another 20 minutes, I reached the temple. It wasn't grand, just a small, crumbling stone structure, half buried in the jungle. A single arched doorway led inside, its frame covered in deep, strange carvings that didn't look like any language I had seen before. I hesitated at the entrance, suddenly aware of how quiet everything was. The jungle had stopped making noise. No birds, no insects, just silence. I took a step inside. The air was cold, too cold for the humid jungle outside. The stone walls were damp, covered in moss, and the carvings continued along the interior, spiraling toward the ceiling. I lifted my phone to take a picture. Then I heard it. A sound behind me. Something shifting in the dirt. I spun around, heart pounding. At first, I thought I was alone. But then my eyes adjusted to the darkness just outside the temple's entrance. And I saw someone standing there. A woman. She was barefoot, dressed in ragged clothing. Her skin almost gray under the faint light. Her face was wrong. Her mouth was too wide, stretching unnaturally across her face. Her eyes were black, hollow. She wasn't breathing. She wasn't blinking. Just watching me. I took a shaky step backward. "Hello," I whispered. She mimicked me. The exact same tone. The exact same voice. "Hello." My blood ran cold. Then, she stepped forward. But she didn't walk. She glided. Like her feet weren't touching the ground. I turned and ran. I didn't look back. The jungle was a blur as I sprinted down the path, my breath ragged, my heart slamming against my ribs. My only focus was getting back to the village. The trees blurred past me. The abandoned village was a distant memory. I wasn't even sure I was still on the right path anymore. Then, the sound of footsteps behind me. Fast. Too fast. I ran harder, my legs burning, my lungs screaming. But the footsteps were getting closer. I could hear her mimicking me. The sound of my own panicked breaths, repeated half a second later. I burst out of the jungle, nearly tripping as I reached the guest house. I didn't stop until I was inside, slamming the door shut behind me. The elderly woman at the front desk saw my face and immediately made me sit down, handing me a cup of something warm. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't have to. I sat there shaking, trying to catch my breath. Then, after a long silence, she finally spoke. "You saw her, didn't you?" I looked at her, my hands still trembling. "She follows travelers," the woman said quietly. "The ones who go looking for things they shouldn't find." I swallowed hard. What happens if she catches you?" The woman just shook her head. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't dare. The next morning, I took the first bus out of that village. But before I left, I made the mistake of glancing at my phone. At the last picture I had taken before I ran. The temple's entrance. And in the shadows, just behind me, barely visible, she was standing there, smiling.